George L. Cassidy was Capitol Hill's top bootlegger during the days of Prohibition. Cassidy walked up and down the halls of Congress, making up to 25 booze deliveries a day. Illegal booze deliveries. Deliveries that were made illegal by his very own customers. He was known as the man in the green hat. Fast forward to 2021, Prohibition has ended, sure, but regulations on the sale and consumption of alcohol are still reminiscent of that era. On top of that, we still have an ongoing pandemic. So alcohol consumption in the US has been on the rise. To be more precise, sales of alcoholic beverages in the United States have grown by 55% overall, and online sales in particular have risen by 243%, just in the last week of March of 2020. It is only understandable that more people are turning towards casual drinking, right? The world is going through a major crisis. And in the face of this crisis, the CDC is looking to continue Prohibition-era policies that pose an even greater threat than individual overconsumption. Prohibition was established with the stated intent of reducing crime and corruption, solving social problems, and improving health and hygiene in America, all of which the government blamed on the overconsumption of alcohol. In retrospect, we know definitively that Prohibition failed. Not only did it not reduce the consumption of alcohol, but it actually increased crime. And yet, still today, many laws in America are reminiscent of the Prohibition era.
We have a bunch of bars closing down, which some would think would actually reduce alcohol consumption. But because beer is predominantly drank at bars, when people go to the liquor store instead, they end up buying liquor because it's just a much more cost-effective way to get alcohol into your system. So by removing part of the market, we've actually increased alcohol consumption just because of the price dynamics of various substances. So in general, alcohol consumption has actually gone up during COVID, even though bars tend to be closed.
Prohibition was not a public health decision. It was a completely political decision. When President Herbert Hoover called Prohibition noble in motive and far-reaching in purpose, he was well aware of the problematic nature of these restrictions. The laws imposed were extremely strict, and politicians, the ones who had made these laws, did not adhere to those laws. Cassidy recounted that he helped 80% of Congress violate Prohibition laws. 80%. He enabled this for more than 5 years. Cassidy was even given an office in the House Office building, provided by his loyal customers. So there is no case to grandstand on this issue. Alcohol laws are completely outdated and ineffective, but the CDC still clings to Prohibition-type tendencies. Their top strategies for preventing excessive drinking are increasing alcohol excise taxes, regulating alcohol outlet density, and maintaining existing government controls over alcohol sales, avoiding privatization.
When the government started cracking down on opioid prescribing back in around 2012, 2013, prescription opioid use disorder and general consumption of prescription opioids did go down. But what the United States did not anticipate is that use of illegal opioids would go up. Heroin use went up, fentanyl use went up, and that's why we now have, in general, less people using opioids in the United States, but unprecedented amounts of people dying. The number of people dying from opioids is about double what it was in 2012 since they put the interventions in place to actually reduce opioid deaths. And in general, that's really what we see all over the place. When the government makes some sort of intervention to reduce the use of one substance, people who have substance use disorders tend to substitute to something else. And there's almost nothing the government can do to affect the general addiction rate to all substances in the United States.
Let's carefully examine those points one by one. 1. Raising taxes does not have a significant effect on the quantity of demand. In economic terms, there is an explanation for this: elasticity.
But if you're someone who has an addiction disorder, which we would call probably perfectly inelastic, they don't have much flexibility to be using something else, the use of drugs among this group of people does not really change much.
Also, raising excise taxes for alcohol raises the costs to bars and restaurants significantly. Selling alcohol is beneficial for consumers, business owners, and states altogether. In times like 2021, when millions of people in the service industry have lost their job, raising taxes to cut alcohol consumption seems cruel as well as unnecessary.
We actually have more people dying of illegal drug use than ever before. And in general, if you look at the illicit drug use rate, it's down. Less people are using illicit drugs. And as governments make alcohol use harder to do, as they increase prices, reduce the amount of liquor stores that might be in a certain area, the substitution to other substances goes up.
2. For regulating alcohol outlet density, the CDC has something called the Guide for Measuring Alcohol Outlet Density. They suggest high alcohol outlet density is a public health problem. The CDC is attempting to create barriers for individuals to consume alcohol. They declare that excessive drinking causes 88,000 deaths per year in the US, so their concern is about public health. Seems legitimate, until you compare it to 300,000 deaths per year caused by obesity, which ranks number 2 on the list of preventable deaths in the US. Yet we see a Dunkin' Donuts around every corner.
Alcohol is one of the easiest drugs to use with temperance, and that's why it's legal. There's people who can have a glass of wine with their dinner and not get into any sort of trouble. Versus if they were trying to consume heroin, it's really hard to consume heroin in a responsible type of way. Well, I probably shouldn't say that.
3. State monopolies on liquor stores. It is no surprise that the CDC, a government agency, is against privatization. However, doing it for the sake of public health seems like quite a stretch. If this is the only reason for the CDC to implement these state monopolies on liquor, we can readily disprove the effectiveness of that methodology. 7 out of the 19 control states rank amongst the top 20 states with the highest alcohol consumption rates.
So substance use disorder from 2015 to now has been completely stable. But the way that they define it is actually incredibly similar as they did in 1999. So I make the argument that substance use disorder has actually been stable from 1999 to now. So we have about a little over 2 decades of data of consistent, stable substance use disorder to all drugs in the last 20 years, amid a plethora of interventions trying to reduce that rate. No matter what the government does, it can't reduce that rate. And the interventions the United States has used in the last 20 years have been disproportionately more authoritarian than anything they've done in the past. That relationship is with all these substances. So when you increase the taxes and expect people to reduce their use when they have inelastic demand, you don't really reduce their use. They have inelastic demand. A lot of these people have substance use disorders. They're addictive.
This clearly highlights the unintended consequences of government actions. This reveals the real concern here. ABC stores create an artificial scarcity in control states. This keeps the alcohol prices high, which benefits the control state's government.
You actually have various types of tax rates among the states. So you might have a super high tax rate in New York, but if you drive right outside of New York to New Hampshire, you'll find tax rates that are even half the prices of what you New Yorkers are paying. So if New York government is actually going to put forward a tax that is more expensive than the travel cost to pick up the substance in another state, people are going to do so. I mean, one thing that just happened in Massachusetts is that they actually banned the sale of all flavored tobacco products. But what they did not anticipate was that Massachusetts citizens would just completely leave the state, go to New Hampshire where the taxes are incredibly low and where the substances are still available for purchase. They all went to New Hampshire, they purchased their substances, and they all came back. So basically, Massachusetts, in putting this flavor ban in place, has basically forfeited all of its tax revenue to New Hampshire.
On the bright side, we can use this crisis to normalize alcohol distribution. 33 states have changed their on-demand alcohol laws to keep businesses up and running during the COVID-19 pandemic. That allowed apps like Drizzly, referred to by some as the Amazon for liquor, to take off in 2020. By approving cocktails to go, the legislature is throwing a much-needed economic lifeline to restaurants and bars, said David Woner, Vice President of DC-based Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. And he's right. More than 8 million people lost their jobs in the restaurant industry. This is a significant help for those restaurants struggling to keep their doors open. Many states are getting ready to make these changes permanent. Alcohol sales have historically been a heavily regulated industry. It hurts consumers more than anyone. Consumers hope to see the new trend of loosening restrictions continue.
The unintended consequences of the alcohol laws are actually very interesting. If they reduce one drink, the proclivity of a person to consume one drink, they see that as a win in the population health mechanism. But it's actually not a very efficient way to do so, because the people who end up drinking less when they make the consumption and purchase of alcohol greater is actually the people who are the most responsible users, the people with substance use disorder, the people who are binge drinking. They are the ones who have the most public health concerns. Any sort of combustible tobacco products, we've seen massive decreases over the last few decades among youth. And a lot of tobacco controllers will say that's because they increased the age to consume, because they've reduced the amount of stores selling, because they've increased taxes. There might be some marginal effects with that, but really, when you look at the data, what decreases the use of tobacco products among children is children thinking that the tobacco products are dangerous. Convincing them not to do the substances in the first place is honestly the most effective way to do this. One thing that the government actually tried to do was poison some of the mechanisms, some of the inputs to create alcohol. They actually started putting poison in many of the grain alcohol cleaning products that were actually able to be consumed for consumption purposes if you really wanted to. And then they ended up killing tens of thousands of people after they did that. So the unintended consequences of government intervention in drug policy since Prohibition is basically to cause more harm than good.
Nation's Restaurant News' Ron Ruggles went so far as to call these rapidly rewritten rules the most widespread changes in state alcohol beverage laws since Prohibition was repealed in 1933. It is time for us to learn from the past experiences of Prohibition. People don't abandon their vices just because they're told to. Bans and regulations make risky habits even riskier.